I think now is a perfect time for those of you who are concerned about these issues to lobby the government gently and to raise community awareness gently so that these possibilities will be closed off before the government has a political need to reactivate them. What else do we need? I think that's probably all I need to talk about, except for one thing. It's ultimately all a matter of our mindset. It's all a matter of what attitude the government has to the treatment of asylum seekers and what attitude we, the community, have to the treatment of asylum seekers. Now that the pressure is off, because the numbers are down, it is the time for us to keep pushing for change. We are not there yet.
Given we are then, as you described, Julian, in a relatively benign climate, I'm wondering, you've outlined a whole range of things that need changing, I think, and I'll come to you, Paris, too, with this one. But given that, there is a sense, particularly with this government, that they mark off things and then they move to the next thing very quickly, too quickly, to actually bring people along. Is there a risk with what has been achieved, the significant things, that the minute they're tested, as you say, that the minute they're tested, because there hasn't actually been any real significant change or overhaul to the law, that we haven't really come very far at all?
I think we haven't come very far. We're going in the right direction, and as I say, all credit to them for what they've done so far. But the problem is not fixed. The problem is not fixed. And it's one reason, at the risk of diverting the subject, one of the reasons this is a good time to press for a Bill of Rights nationally, because a Bill of Rights nationally might help slow down the sort of legislation that has produced these grotesque results that we've seen. You need to bring in a Bill of Rights at a time when there is not public concern about abuse of rights. When there is public concern about abuse of rights, it's always a concern that the minority, the unpopular minority, is causing trouble. And that's the wrong time to get a Bill of Rights, because you won't get it through politically.
Paris, with what you've observed in the last 6 months of this new government, as a comparison to what you observed in the previous 11.5 years, let's just look at that as a comparison. Where do you consider we are in terms of the social implications of refugee policy now, and what's your view on where we are?
I guess the first thing I'd say is that I'm very cautiously optimistic, because I think there's a different kind of receptiveness that exists currently, certainly with the new minister and at levels within the immigration department, but in the government per se. Rudd has made statements about refugees and the treatment of asylum seekers in the past. He's made a commitment to international law and all of those sorts of things. My nervousness is that it hasn't been tested in the electorate when there's been political heat from different pressure points. And that's where I think the spine will stiffen up and good leadership will come through, or it'll slip back. But I certainly think in all of the conversations I've had with the Minister and the Minister's office, there is a strong appreciation about some of the things that are going on and the need to change that. The how is a very different thing, because you have to remember, and I'm still surprised by this, but all political parties oftentimes are a very broad church. And so just because the Minister may have a particular view doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the cabinet colleagues hold a particular view. And, you can't move these things forward without bringing your colleagues along in that process. The other bit of caution is that we've had very hard policy in place for 15 or 16 years, really, since mandatory detention was introduced. And it was a strong political issue, and I think that turning that around in a short period of time is not realistic. I make the comparison with gun laws in the US. No matter what happens, no matter how many people are shot, kids are shot in the school, every time the gun debate runs in the US, it works for the Republicans, because over a period of time it's been entrenched as their win issue. And for a while, the asylum seeker issue had a similar flavour to it, no matter what, which is why the Labor government didn't want to talk about these issues in the run-up to the election, because they knew all their polling was telling them they couldn't win on it. So I'm optimistic because I think there's a receptiveness, there's a commitment to reviewing things. There are processes that are about to be geared up around consulting to review things from what I've been told, and that's really positive. Post the Palmer inquiry, a number of changes already began thanks to people like Petro and Georgia and Bruce Baird and Judy Moyland and lots of people in the room here. One of them was this thing that's called the community care pilot, which is far from a perfect alternative, but it's a dramatically different approach to dealing with vulnerable asylum seekers. The community care pilot basically relies on a partnership between the Red Cross, a number of different NGOs working with asylum seekers, case managers from the Department of Immigration and the International Organisation for Migration, to provide a more supportive framework of assistance to asylum seekers in the community. As I said, it's only been a pilot and there are issues with it that need to be resolved. But the importance of it isn't so much about its scale, but it's about the way in which it challenges previous thinking. Previously, it was antithetical to government thinking to believe that if you were supportive and humane and decent to asylum seekers and looked after them in the community, that they would make a choice, for example, if they weren't found to be refugees, to return voluntarily. So everything was being justified as if we're generous, if we're supportive, it's not a concession to that person, it's a concession to the people smugglers, and more will keep coming, going back to Julian's theory. Many of us argued for a long time, not just me, other people who are here today, from Hoffman and Asylum Seeker Resources and the Red Cross and so forth, that it was in fact the opposite. The harsher you got, the more entrenched the process became, the more acrimonious it became because of the degree of offence that people felt about the inhumanity of locking kids up behind razor wire. All of those sorts of things, that in fact it was the opposite. And then if you built a system that was fairer, that was more humane, that treated people decently, you in fact would end up, one, with more timely outcomes, two, far more humane treatment of people and minimise any damage. Two, if your goal was to get people to return if they didn't have a claim, then we argue that people would be in a better position to make a reasoned decision about what their options were with the right support and advice, and that it would be much cheaper to do it that way in all sorts of levels. And lo and behold, the pilot to date has indicated positively on all of those fronts, to the complete amazement of people in the department that put it in place, because it was antithetical. Now, there are problems with it, there's no doubt, and the things that Julian talked about work rights or bridging visas and those sorts of things still have to be addressed, because a lot of people don't need as much looking after if they can actually work and earn an income. And at the moment, if ultimately you're unsuccessful in your claim and you have to go back, but you haven't been able to work and you don't have any money, you can't pay for the ticket. So the only way you can get back is to go into detention, and then the government will pay for your ticket. But then they have to notify the country that they're sending you back to, and so officials are waiting for you at the other end, and so people are terrified of it. So the point about this new approach around with things like the community care pilot, arguing up different approaches around work rights and so forth, is more that it's challenged the conventional wisdom that we need to be harsh. And in fact, we're getting better outcomes on all of those fronts. I think the rate of voluntary departure out of a detention centre in Australia over the last 7 or 8 years would have been so minimal, like less than 5% throughout that entire period of time.